From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Roberta Schaefer, and I have the joy every day of serving as the Associate Librarian for Library Services here at the Library of Congress. One of the areas that I adore having within my portfolio is the Center for Poetry and Literature, which is headed by the phenomenal Robert Casper, who's sitting in the front row. It's always wonderful to have a podium from which to acknowledge him and his terrific efforts, and so I do that this evening with great joy. But it really is terrific to be gathered here this evening for the library's annual Witter Bynner Fellowship reading, and I want to extend a special welcome this evening to a group of Iranian poets who are here as part of the poetry as part of a program called Poetry in the Public Sphere, which is organized by World Learning and the University of Chicago. And if you will just acknowledge them, I would be so grateful. We welcome you, and we are just amazed at the coincidence that this evening across the street, in our Jefferson building, we are opening 1,000 Years of the Persian Book, a brand new exhibit that is part of a series that we are doing over the course of 5 years, celebrating the role of books in different cultures. And I don't think I need to tell this audience how important poetry has been in the Persian culture and how much contribution Persian poets have made to the whole coral reef of poetry, beginning most notably, I think, in the 10th century, although I'm sure I'm admitting my ignorance because there probably were many poets before that time, in the epic period, taking us to modern day and 21st century with so many wonderful Persian poets who now are totally using free verse. So we welcome you, and we are just so happy that this confluence is happening this evening with the event that we are attending. So I'm delighted you're here, and I am also delighted to celebrate our two honorees. And of course, Honoree Fanonne Jeffers is here, Professor Jeffers, and we're also here to celebrate the late Jake Adam York, who is one of the fellows that our phenomenal poet laureate has chosen this year. Professor Jeffers has traveled from Oklahoma, where she is teaching, and our poet laureate, Natasha Trethewey, will read, she'll introduce both poets, but then she will read from Mr. York's works. And I have to say that to prepare for this evening, on Sunday night, I went to look at and listen to a wonderful interview that Jake Adam had done with Natasha, but of Natasha, a few years ago at Emory. And it was a fabulous experience. I urge you to find that interview because, of course, sorry to be choking up, he's so alive in that dimension. And I can now close my eyes tonight when Natasha reads his words and think of him and see him in my mind's eye. And I'm so grateful to technology, to be quite honest, for that fact. We are very fortunate tonight to have friends and family of Mr. York here with us, including his parents, Linda and David. I know you're there. His brother, Joe, and his wife, Sarah Skeen, and I don't think I've met Sarah before. So Sarah, welcome. Hello. Stephen Schwartz is the executive director of the Witter Bynner Foundation for Poetry, and their foundation is the supporter of these fellowships. Really it is so unfortunate that he can't be with us tonight, not only because we would love to honor him in person and show our appreciation, but because we know that tonight will be a fabulous event, and we wish everyone could be with us for these kinds of events. But he did say that he wanted us to bring his congratulations to our poets, and also to just have us read a quote from him, which is, and I quote, "The motivation for the fellowships was to honor the position of the poet laureate and to provide the laureate with an opportunity to bring to light poets whose work they appreciate and admire. In so doing, they pass the literary torch and demonstrate the generosity and grace of poetry and poets." And so that's the end of the quote, and we thank him so much. Thank you, Stephen, wherever you might have to be tonight, for this wonderful sponsorship. We've been doing this now for 17 years, so I think we've gotten the hang of it. I think it's not like the human being. We're way out of adolescence, and we're into real maturity. Our newest fellows join an esteemed company from the course of the 17 years, and each of those poets in his or her own right is to be honored and to be remembered fondly when they were on this podium, and of course to continue to have us support them. All of these poets that have been fellows have challenged us to question our values, our opinions about things. They've caused us to open up our minds and our imaginations. They've shared with us a place to provide refuge from everyday life, and in many cases, they've shown us everyday life that is so different from our own lives and let us into their lives in such a deep and profound way as only poetry can do. So it is really terrific that we are able to continue this event now at the Library of Congress, which shares in so many ways the mission and purpose of the fellowship. It also is very important to demonstrate the role of the Poet Laureate, a key role. Eat your heart out, President, Supreme Court Justice, Speaker of the House, Secretary of State. We know every one of you would like to be, but cannot be, the Poet Laureate of the United States. And if ever there was someone for whom all of those people I have named could not compete, it is the 19th Poet Laureate, Natasha Trethewey. And so it is a great pleasure to just briefly say what an enormous tenure she has had, bringing poetry to all kinds of places that it was not before, bringing nourishment to people through poetry, and with her charm and wit and warmth, really letting us see what a phenomenal role, what a phenomenal part the Poet Laureate of the United States plays in the life and the mind of America. Natasha, please take the podium and let the evening begin.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. You know, I'm thinking about the statement from Stephen Schwartz that Roberta read, and it's absolutely true. I'm nearing the end of my term, the end of my second term, and what I know now that I might have thought a little bit before, but I know without a doubt now, is that what I get to do tonight is the very best thing I get to do. It is that I get to champion the work of really important poets that I've admired that everyone should know. Everyone should be reading these wonderful poets. And so it's a great honor to be able to do this. Both of these poets that we are recognizing tonight have written powerfully about food and family, American music, jazz and the blues, and American history, both regional and national. And they are both Southerners, as am I. Both the children of mothers who were educators, both of them acutely attuned to the fabric of race that makes up this country, its cultural and literary traditions, its blindness and amnesia, and its great possibility. That possibility is manifest in their poems, providing an abiding vision of the more perfect union we are still working toward. I need to stop for a moment also and say thank you to Stephen Schwartz and the Witter Bynner Foundation, and of course my colleague and dear friend Rob Casper, who supported me in the decision this year to name one of the poets posthumously to this award. In his memorial to the great Irish poet William Butler Yeats, W.H. Auden wrote, "Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry." I think of that line whenever I read the work of Jake Adam York, whose native South and home state, Alabama, hurt him into some of the most necessary poetry of our time. The author of 4 collections of poetry, including the recently released Abide, Jake was a poet of great vision and a deeply humane intelligence. His work to chart the history of his native South, and particularly the civil rights movement, its violence and murders, as well as our contemporary erasures of it, represents a brave reclamation and reckoning, a reclamation rooted in the absolute necessity to articulate in the elegant language of poetry a fuller version of our American story. To do this, Jake looked unflinchingly at the fate of his geography, the history he'd inherited, the complicity immanent in his own flesh, and in so doing, made it possible for us to see ourselves with a stark and brutal clarity, as well as with a measure of empathy that serves as a scaffolding upon which to build a place of healing and forgiveness. This is the redress of poetry, what the late Seamus Heaney described as poetry's power to help right the wrongs of the past through the vision of a better, more just and humane society. A patriot in the noblest sense, Jake turned his critical and loving eye on his South to make it better. At the same time, he allows us to celebrate our South without the easy blindness and willed forgetting of nostalgia. In its fierce reckoning, Jake's work asks us to consider the role of poetry in the pursuit of social justice. In the poems I'll read now, each one in some way a self-portrait, you will hear also the way that the fellowship of food, how it links us, sustains, and comforts us, is not unlike poetry, in that it allows us to commune with each other, to say and hear the most difficult things with empathy. The first poem considers his mother, Linda York, as a girl in the midst of history. Knowing Linda as I do, a wise and devoted educator, I can imagine the intellectual work she did to guide her son toward this necessary investigation of our shared past and her own. This poem honors her too. It's also particularly fitting to me to be able to read Jake's poems at this historical moment. You know, here we are, the library has just taken down the exhibit remembering the Civil War at the 150th anniversary, and now are about to put up the exhibit remembering the Civil Rights Movement. Jake's work is squarely in the midst of that. Self-portrait as a moment in 1963. Supper's late, and my mother sprawls before the console, half watching gun smoke, Alabama history spread before her, those schools almost out for summer, and the chickens almost fried to that perfect crisp. Then it's over. Credits stamped over final stills, and the show gives way to news, a minute of film from Birmingham, not an hour south, where police are turning dogs on kids as young as she, spraying them with hoses until they fall, the water she isn't watching curling like smoke in the air. My grandmother flicks the switch, and they're gone. They eat in quiet, each cutting a breast or thigh into steam, forking beans or macaroni until the plate's blank faces shine again. This is years before she'd meet my father, before I'd come to that table, that food, that room. There's a silence here I want to scratch away so I can see what's underneath, what they don't recall. I want to turn someone's head, my grandmother's maybe, or my mother's, back toward the TV where the tube's still fading, the ghost of that scene on the edge of that room. I want someone there to see and remember so I can leave and go back into the future, not history, not yet. Yeats wrote, "We make of the quarrel with others rhetoric, but of the quarrel with ourselves poetry." Jake's self-portraits enact that idea, examining his place in the troubled history of our nation. We see him looking into a plate of food for what it allows to transpire between the people in the poem, the way a restaurant window or an empty plate might give back his own reflection. This is Self-Portrait in a Plate Glass Window, Selma. Steam rises from my plate, chicken and greens and black-eyed peas, and in the window where I can look beneath the honeydew rind of sliver moon of scalp, through my own reflected eyes, to the sidewalk and the lot beyond, then back to the dim interior where the owner turns from his TV mystery back to me. It's the right address, though the name has changed, and he must be asking, as I am I where I'm supposed to be? A few doors up, I can almost see it. A plaque remembers James Reeb, the reverend who'd come to march and last ate in this cafe. It was walkers then. Klansmen watched across the street, waiting for the collar, for the face to emerge, 3 of them, maybe 4, with pipes and bats in the door of a grocery someone demolished years ago. Eyes down, I'm working to the blank plate and the questions that have to follow. Where you from? What you after? Even if no one says a thing, the quiet holds them the way dark will hold all color, and one memory will look like another, and staying will seem stranger than having come. We'll rise then, the glass between us, one in the dusk, one inside, close enough to feel the cafe's warmth radiating into the town and the cool March evening reaching into the room. We'll walk toward the door and become one and slide off the glass, leaving only the window with its inscription of moonlight and clouds. Tomorrow will rub almost entirely away. We're also at the anniversary of the Freedom Rides, and this is a poem that deals with that particular history. It's called Self-Portrait at a Bend in the Road, Tarsus, Alabama. It takes a while to find the place where I can hold the photograph and the mountain will finish itself. And a while until I let it drop, unafraid that the bus will be there, evaporating into flame. The mob still shouting, still waiting for the troopers and agents to clear so they can finish the job. Or the freedom riders they've chased from Anniston, still smoked out and choking on the grass. So much else is gone. The grocery where the driver ran for help. The homes where Mother's Day dinners cooled while the locals watched the smoke agitate the North Alabama sky. And Janie Miller, the 12-year-old with a well bucket and a dipper for anyone who coughed. They taunted her neighbors, the store owner and the riot, even the bus driver safe within the fold, but she carried on and they carried on, even after the wreck was towed, until the millers packed and were gone. But half of that, maybe more, would be torn down to widen the road, and that silence would be lost, would be written over, leaving the road a byway, a dead end, with a plaque where people hold the photographs to the air, so they can stand where the newsmen stood, over that place where the writers waited in a circle of grace and disbelief, fragile as the surface of a ladle that hears each word. Now the traffic's talking over something else. I catch myself on the car's hot windows, distorted just enough to be someone else, a cousin or a local on the edge of the frame, ready to disappear into the smoke or the heat or the trees. The mountains dark behind me, my hands on the latch, the last warmth still there. One of us is leaving. One of us is already gone. In his body of work, poems of sheer beauty, grace, precision of image, and technical skill, we find a profound intervention into our ongoing conversations about race and social justice, a bold and necessary challenge to our historical amnesia. Jake Adam York is one of our most indispensable American poets. Let me say it again. Jake Adam York is one of our most indispensable American poets. And the presence of his work in the world, his vision, his enduring spirit, is for me, and I think for all of us, a guiding light. I'll leave you with one last poem so that Jake's voice will keep sounding in our ears, the rhythm of his courage in our hearts. Elegy, Gadsden, Alabama. The finger is gone that pointed the way so the general could escape, the Confederate who would enshrine the finger and its girl and turn them into stone. And now the finger is gone from the marble hand, proving every body is mutable, however white. So the finger is just a story of a finger that points to its absence, which everyone ignores as they passed, incognito as the getaways of suburban legend, having gloved the hand and hung it until it gave, so they could move like forest away from the water and into history, lost in the crowd or the trees, until that day after each Thanksgiving when all the country's majorettes, its quarterbacks and former mayors and fez-hatted Shriners file in their large white Cadillacs, those heroes among them waving as they pass down Broad Street, disappearing as if she still pointed the way. They don't look back. Behind her, the bridge arches over the compendious river into the dimmer streets of East Gadsden, where one parade night 2 men knocked, then shot a preacher in his door, sure of a Black Panther front, a fist they had to keep from rising, then pulled away, slowly as if in their own parade. Those Klansmen, Forrest's distant kin, scanning the windows and the doors, passing the boarded juke and the store, where months later a neighborhood teen would rob and hold the clerk at gunpoint and push him into the storeroom and douse him with gasoline, then light the match just to scare him, he'd say, before the flames went up, burning his face into a map of the country everyone would read as an answer, leaving him to stagger, leaving him to crawl toward the door, to call out through the slow bleed of dawn. In Greek, elegy means morning song, a poem for what's been lost. And the Greeks always cut something from their lines, a syllable or two, to create a silence or a place to hear it, maybe breaking meter and slipping in an I am, which means limping or lame, like the gait of a wounded man, stepping quick, then stopping so the pain can arrive. And so the elegy, the morning song, reaches for what's missing or left behind, like the woman who found the preacher gasping in his door, or the one who knelt beside the clerk on the banks of a silence she could not ford, or like the teenager, or like the finger, or the fist it leaves behind, as if to say, even memory can forget itself and be written into another history while everyone is looking at something else. The caddies slide into the night and are folded once again beneath their hoods. The cheerleaders, the Shriners, and the quarterbacks take off their suits and enter the crowds again. And we drive through those streets where the day falls as indifferently as before. We come over the bridge. We do not look back. We think of the girl as we pass and the finger we imagine still pointing the way. Honoree Fanonne Jeffers, Associate Professor of English at the University of Oklahoma, is the author of 3 collections of poems. Honoree's remarkable debut collection, The Gospel of Barbecue, was selected by the late, great Lucille Clifton for the Stan and Tom Wick Prize and was a finalist for the Patterson Poetry Prize. In it, she began her ongoing exploration of larger public histories as well as family histories in a language earthy and bold, infused with the attitude of blues. Poems in her haunting second collection, Outlandish Blues, move thematically from the issues of sexual abuse and domestic violence in biblical stories to the similar brutalities of slave ships and everyday life. Throughout the collection, Honoree looks unflinchingly at these subjects in poems underscored by an amazing musicality, a constant reaching towards song. Honoree's most recent collection, Red Clay Suite, Crab Orchard Review, 2007, expanded her earlier musings by taking on yet another aspect of history, that of the Southern landscape, its position both real and imagined as a crossroads. In locating that place, geographical, psychological, mythological, she has written poems that examine the crux of identity, a gendered, raced selfhood, and the relationship to place. This is one of the great strengths of her work, and similar to that of Jake's, a reckoning beyond identification to exploration and a kind of resolution, reconciliation, as in the movements of a blues, a grasp of subject matter beyond the easy identifications of victim and oppressor. Always compelling in its structural framework of the blues that Honoree uses as formal scaffolding. For her themes, the blues form is an illuminating metaphor and a brilliant rhetorical device to underscore the intersections she explores. At the heart of Honoree's current project is a series of poems exploring the lesser-known history and life of Phyllis Wheatley, the experience of the 18th century American poet forming the basis of a complex exploration of the intersections between spirituality and creativity, audience and selfhood, love and marriage, and the sense of psychological exile brought on by displacement, all set against the backdrop of the Atlantic slave trade and the Enlightenment. The Age of Phyllis is also a meditation on the age of reason. Woven throughout the collection is the contemporary poet grappling with these issues for herself with a fearless determination, as in these lines. Africa is not my motherland, Gore is the reason. I am an unruly sister who won't curtsy as traditional Senegalese women do, or cover my head, not because I don't know the customs of this country, but because patois is an ache of history, and I want everyone to hurt like me. In her plangent words, we hear the exile's lament, the song of the displaced that finds its only home in language. Please join me in welcoming to this house of words, poet Honoree Fanonne Jeffers.
Good evening. Kind of have to get myself together, thinking about Jake. And even though this is the fanciest venue I've ever been in, I am going to do what I always do before I read poetry, and that is take my shoes off. Yes, Big Country is my nickname. First, I'd like to thank Natasha Trethewey, Poet Laureate of the United States, for even considering me for this prestigious honor, the Witter Bynner Fellowship, much less choosing me for it. This is not false modesty. There are many fine, talented, hardworking American poets out there, and I understand how truly lucky and blessed I am to receive the Witter Bynner Fellowship. And Natasha, I am so grateful to you. I'd like to thank the Witter Bynner Foundation as well, which continues the work of the late distinguished poet whose name the foundation carries. I am grateful to the Library of Congress, and in particular, Robert Casper, head of the Poetry and Literature Center, for all his hard work on my behalf, and also Matthew Blakely, Program Support Assistant, for his unflagging patience in the face of my many phone calls over the past 2 months, and Rachel Karsten's intern, who navigated me through this labyrinth they call the Library of Congress. I accept this fellowship in the name of Phyllis Wheatley, the first American woman of African descent to publish a book of poetry, and in the names of all other of my ancestors of many cultures, both known and unknown, who have guided me in sundry ways throughout my life and writing career, especially over the past decade. I am especially happy to receive this honor along with my late colleague and friend, Jake Adam York, my fellow Alabaman, who dedicated his career to writing beautiful poems about history, much of it important to my own African American communities. Jake is one of the ancestors now, so I would like to make a poetic libation in celebration of his life and journey by reading one of his poems before I turn to the reading of my own work. Natasha, may I have the book? That's right, darling. It's an emotional night, but in the ways of Southern folk, we send Jake up in the best way with his words. Sensitivity, May 4th, 1959, for Mac Charles Parker, lynched near Poplarville, Mississippi, April 24th, 1959, recovered from the Pearl River, May 4th, 1959. 6 weeks since that whisper rose into the window of a stage behind the Half Notes bar, Whisper Mingus, let spread like a bruise. Lester Young is dead. 6 weeks since he fell from the sky, dead off the plane from Paris, and each night this goodbye's gone more sensitive. Now the flats are hid, and handies learn to fold the sound of breath inside his notes, the bleeding throat, tongue's last epileptic flutter, while Mingus thrills the bass in waves of sound and fail no microphone can hold. Drinks tremble like the river halfway from here to the grave, pulled by wind or plummet, cough of strings beneath the hand, and uptown a tape is waiting for magnets to say this again. A teletype is writing a story for tomorrow's Times, a body pulled from a river in Mississippi with only fingers for a name. Here, only the drinks are listening as Irvin rises, ghosting Handy's lead, and even they cannot hear how the rivers heal their quiet, how they feel their scars so perfectly that remember feels like forget. Then the breath is gone. The wood hums a moment longer, and each surface moves till the glasses and the waters are glass again and ready to catch each clap, each note that falls. I turn now to the work of my latest project, The Age of Phyllis. As I said, Phyllis Wheatley is the first she's the first American woman of African descent to publish a book. It appeared in 1773 entitled Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. The manuscript that I will read from is based on her life. There are many poems in my book about this extraordinary woman who was born somewhere in Africa and then sold as a small child into slavery in North America. We don't know for sure that she embarked on the Middle Passage from the Senegambia region of West Africa, but times and dates and the fact that she was named the same as a slave ship that arrived in Boston Harbor in the same year that she arrived seem to point to this region. She was purchased by the Wheatley family, perhaps by the husband, perhaps by the wife. No one really knows. And within 18 months, not only was speaking the English language, not only was reading, but was reading scripture and classical literature. She began publishing poems as a tween, and Susanna Wheatley, her mistress, became somewhat of a stage mother, pushing Phyllis's literary career forward. And during the pre-revolutionary war conflict, Phyllis became the most famous African in America of her time. I will read poems dealing with the aspect of displacement in her life, and I begin with a quote, a traditional Wolof proverb of Senegal, Undak du fata yun am, water does not forget its path. In West Africa, a griot is a poet, an historian, and a praise singer. This is chorus of the Mother's Griot. This is for Phyllis Wheatley Peters, and this is for my beloved mentor, Lucille Clifton. Amnesiac wood, nostrils of girls who was bought, uncle's hand, guts on the air, who was sold, defeated man, history's charnel, I say, trader silver, sailing knot to knot, naked in the corner, door of no return, sing the mutiny, in the slave house, sniff bougainvillea, who stands ashamed, I say, ready Don's keel, naked in the corner, jealous sharks. I shall, who did, I say they did, I'm here, my name, who shall, I say yes here. On the battlefield, call woman, call America, call revolution, call the brother, call myth. I say, call the auction, call Africa, call revolution. In God's name, is this called? Is my mother? Is some kin? I say, is this called? Is water? Is my mother? And what? Is this called? Before the taking of the little girl, someplace in Africa, circa 1761. Mystery is the word for my purposes here. This child, frail, not quite whole, not the leader of the gang, the strange understanding yet to be revealed. Is she dancing with the others? Is there a shaking of tail feathers, a nonsense ditty? Shimmy to the west, shimmy to the east, shake it, shake it, shake it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. A sharing of secrets with a lagging friend? I'm full of questions. I can ask history what I want. I can forget the rest. Why will the slave raiders snatch a thin, sickly girl? Why not leave her behind for the usual spoils, the men with clubs, the charcoaled village, the old ones, the babies? I can say, no, we won't speak about all that. I can keep coming back to this blank someplace before her taking, the story of the red cloth not yet laid out, a flawed girl playing, brightness in a mother's crown, a pearl if she lives by the sea, the strand of a plait, needed point. Surely, love doesn't rest in emptied air without some disappointment, but this is a good moment, isn't it? I can run to my own playground in my mind, remember a cupped palm next to my ear. I can call my mother who is yet alive. I can claim my memories. I won't forget her name or mine. She can answer her ringing telephone. A lot happened to me when I went to Africa, not the least of I met a man and fell in love. A Senegalese man, a Wolof man, but I almost didn't go. A colleague and good friend of mine, a young scholar named Jonathan Sinchin, when I was at the American Antiquarian Society for my fellowship, and I had done my reading, and I was feeling all puffed up with, all the praise, and he came up to me and said, so when are you going to Africa? And I said, I have no intention of going to Africa, because at that time I was still cranky about the transatlantic slave trade, and I continue to be. And my husband and I have very rousing discussions about it. And he said to me, how can you start her story with slavery? The thing you need to know is that Jonathan Sinchin was a white man. And so I was very embarrassed that as an African American, it took someone who was not African American to point out to me the obvious. This is a poem that is a response to a poem written by my father, the Black Arts Movement poet, Lance Jeffers. "O Africa, where I baked my bread." And an Obad is a song of lovers parting. This is Obad for West African history. My flesh song, a growing plot of womb, a woman's life mere and common if she is blessed. Chickens gossiping in the courtyard, hungry children taught the languages of millet and yam, some days cultivated pepper, discord with my husband or my co-wives. History, I greet you with the words of lovers. How I miss you, how I crave you, such joy to release suffering in the light. So much scattered in the deluge, dusty specks washed away. But I do know it was many years until we tasted bread. I furiously composed this poem, which might be bad, but I composed it because Natasha is from Mississippi. And this poem, when I was doing research, reading about African Muslim slavery, and I discovered that originally in West Africa, Muslims would not and could not sell, my husband is Muslim, so we talk about this a lot, would not and could not sell other Muslims into slavery. But after, a couple hundred years, they found out that there was profit to be made. And so what Muslims would do, they would accuse other Muslims of heresy and thus justify selling them into slavery. And it reminded me of when black men were arrested for very frivolous charges like vagrancy and sent to Parchman Farm. And so this poem is a blues. And on one side, it's spoken from 1925, and on the other side, it's spoken from 1725. This is Black Blues, Kaffir, Parchman Farm, Muslim Senegambia. The man hemmed me up, called and mastered me. Y'all, this here ain't right. Brother, show some mercy. Standing on the sidewalk, kneeling in my courtyard, minding my own business, hands a goblet of prayer. Jesus knows I'm innocent, reading the prophet's words. Lord knows I'm hurting, peace be upon his name. Boy, why ain't you working? I owed him one small debt. Boy, lazy ain't no good. He threatened my youngest. Chained in the court, chained in the court. Vagrancy, what's the charge? Apostasy, named my sin. What about my woman, my wives unveiled? What about my children, my sons now rudderless? My mama said, son, the cost of silver and gold. Stay away from them crossroads, will become your enemy. What about my woman, my wives unveiled? What about my children, brother, show some mercy. Vagrancy the charge, my heresy never. Lord knows I'm innocent, hear me, alhamdulillah. I'm going to just cut one of these poems. I have a whole series of poems about the slave trade, but this one poem is based upon a particular event that happened that sort of gathered a lot of support for the abolition of slavery in Great Britain. In the transatlantic slave trade, a lot of times the sailors or the captain of the ship would order the sailors to throw living enslaved Africans into the water. This was a common event, and the sharks would follow, etc. This particular poem is based upon the Zong ship incident, and the enslaved people were thrown into the water. Between 132 and 142 were murdered that way. What was unusual is that the owners of the ship went to court to sue their insurers to regain the losses of the people that they had murdered. And so this poem is based upon Romare Bearden's painting, Odysseus Rescued by Sea Nymphs. Blues, Odysseus. How many sat underwater, entangled by myth's past tense before Odysseus, always living, was saved by Homer's tablet? And centuries after that story was written in the land of not make-believe, a crew of sailors threw 132 Africans into the Atlantic Ocean. Heave-ho to souls and people and laws and kin. But Odysseus lives, he always will, our great white hope before whiteness was invented. This hero who longs for the wood's sway, despite his tendency to chase girls, I want to be happy that Homer imagined a sea housing pretty, forgiving nymphs, while somewhere else a wheel dances and someone else drowns. Sharks should pass Odysseus by, never imagining his taste. The gods shouldn't pull at his fate, now angry, now benevolent. I try hard not to blame that man. We all deserve our Maker's love. And now we turn to the little girl who would be called Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley has probably been maligned for over 100 years because of two lines from a poem by her. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand." Two lines from an 8-line poem. And when I was doing research on her, becoming fascinated by her, but still really disturbed by those two lines, I had an epiphany. And this poem is based upon that epiphany. The next two poems are written about her two mothers, the one who we will never know what her name was, and Susanna Wheatley, who became her owner and her surrogate mother as well. One thing you need to know, Yai means mother in Wolof. Mothering, number one, Yai, someplace in Africa, circa 1761. Mercy, child. What a mother might have said, pointing at the sun rising, what makes life possible. Then dripped the bowl of water, reverent, into oblivious earth. Was this prayer for her? Respect for the dead or disappeared, an act to please a genius child? Her little girl could speak only of water, bowl, sun, light arriving, light gone, sometime after the nice white lady paid and named her for the ship. Mercy, what Phyllis claimed after that sea journey. Let's call it that. Let's lie to each other. Not early descent into madness, naked travail among filth and rats. What got Phyllis over the sea? What kept a stolen daughter? Perhaps it was mercy, dear Rita. Mercy, dear brethren. Water, bowl, sun, a mothering, God's milky sound, morning shards, and she wondered if her child forgot her real name, refused to envision the rest. Baby teeth missing, and somebody wrapping her treasure barely in a dirty carpet. 'Twas mercy. You know the story, how we've lied to each other. Mothering number 2, Susanna Wheatley, Boston Harbor, summer 1761. And there's an epigraph from the Boston Newsletter, July 30th, 1761. To be sold, a parcel of likely Negroes imported from Africa. Inquire of John Avery at his house next door to the White Horse, or at a store adjoining to said Avery's distill house at the South End near the South Market. And so, because the little girl was bony and frail, Mistress Susanna Wheatley gained her for a trifling, passing by the other slaves from the brig called Phyllis. Her mind muddled by what the light revealed, a 7-year-old naked body there for every grown sailor to lay his shameless eyes upon, a child the age of her own dead little girl. I'm trying to both see and discard that day, as when I stood over the open casket of an old man, counting the lines on his face, grieving yet perverse, refusing to believe that hours from then he'd be cranked down into the grave. And so the lady tarried in front of the sickly child, distracted by the gulls screaming at port, their shadows dogging the constant sea. They were drawn by the stink of a slave ship, by lice in unwashed heads of hair. And so she bought that child, not someone older with muscles strong enough to carry a servant's burden. That was the moment. A humming mythic page. That one. In the carriage, a mothering gesture, pale finger beneath a chin, lifting the face up to trust, the fickle air between them almost love. She took the child into her home, fed and bathed her, deciphered the naps on her head, dressed her in strange garments, gratitude and slavery. And so, Phyllis Wheatley's poetry very much is based upon her faith in a merciful God, even in the face of everything that had happened. She took, the good things that happened in her life as signs that someone was looking over her. She was baptized in the same church as the Wheatleys, and this is my imagining the day that she was baptized, August 18th, 1771. Phyllis Wheatley is baptized at Old South Church in Boston. My body needed fresh light, some calm. I wanted understanding of water's touch. I think I know God requires no more blood. It was grace chasing me. I must be patient for him. I reminded myself that to be free means without and within, lonely times, though my life better than my brethren's. To keep airing my snatched hours would be sinful. Peace was still. At last I heard him, then found I must sit in the balcony, a nobody in the sanctuary, a Negro, a New England Christian loves a soul, though not the skin, a lie for a pious man, but true for a master. We sable rest in secret places, glory sent. Nobody knows our troubles, our journey to Jesus. Despite Jordan's wide swath, I swam to him, the King of Kings, small trickster spirit, bright hopeful moment. I came upon hosannas, the skies realigned in revolution, a world stolen like me, dear lords of England. Suddenly, equal enemies and claps of thunder changed this servant. I am narrow and dark and determined. My mother and father, unseen, ask due reverence from their Ethiop. My kin's trinity in sacraments of today. No triangle keeps us from heaven. My Sunday hymn, I shall open my eyes. 2 more poems. So Phyllis left America and went to London, where she was celebrated by many. And she met Benjamin Franklin, and she traveled around. And so when I went to London on my honeymoon, it was a working honeymoon, I retraced her steps. God bless you. This poem is based upon a section of a letter that she wrote a man about being presented with an edition of Milton's Paradise Lost. I'll just read it. In London, I was presented with a folio edition of Milton's Paradise Lost, printed on a silver type, so called from its elegance, I suppose, by Mr. Brooke Watson Merchant. Since my return to America, my master has, at the desire of my friends in England, given me my freedom. Letter from Phyllis Wheatley to David Worcester, October 18th, 1773. And this is called Golden. Milton was infamous and dead when they placed Phyllis in the first boat. He'd contemplated the scales of evil, soft skin of a woman, patriarch wronged by love, several lifetimes of suffering I ams. The poet's common woes would come much later: darkness, God's gift, Satan's hiss. The blind master and his precocious apprentice divided by color and reason 100-some years. When Phyllis crossed that same sea, a teenager, she might have closed her eyes, hoped to stroke the triangle's rim. Milton wouldn't reconcile himself to blindness, to cringing to upright men. No one would sell her away from her mother because Ham wasn't damned by God. The second ship would take her back 12 years to a childhood in a lost Senegambia. The clock would break. The muses wouldn't love her. They'd strip her of the letters of the English alphabet. She'd be a stranger to Christ, to fame, to the great chain, to the curious eyes of the prying master race. There would be no trade for Phyllis to make, wit in exchange for Eden. And this last poem is after Rita Dove, or Miss Rita as I call her, first wrote about this lady, Belinda, who was a former slave of Isaac Royale, who was a loyalist. And when he fled to England, all of his property was seized. In 1783, a judicial decision in Massachusetts freed the slaves. Belinda is the first former slave on record who petitioned for reparations. In her petition, she mentions that she was worshiping the Orisha when she and her parents were taken. This claims her as someone who was a member of the Yoruba religion. For the first of two times, Belinda, former slave of the house of Isaac Royale, petitions the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a pension in her old age, 1783. I shall trust the new word of this country, freedom. I shall not call the names of the dead. In that taken child's place, here is Belinda toiling in unnatural cold. I ask for bits of what you sing, what you hold so dear. I have a woman's memory, men of pagan war fingering silver or cowrie. Those men had no thought for me, only the blue in front, trifling schemes, stricken drums. I ask for less than what is written in some good book or on the gathered conscience. I know you have. More than that, too much. Understanding in this life remains a brick mansion. Pennies in exchange for what is gone from me. I ask in my three gods' names, the Orisha, always they are here when I look around at this newfound place, Oshun, Obatala, Shango, Yemenya, Oya, Eshu, Elegbara. Like you, they sail and anchor where they please. And yes, they too crave. Thank y'all so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Casper. I'm the head of the Poetry and Literature Center here at the Library of Congress, and I would like to thank Honoree and Natasha for terrific readings celebrating our Witter Bynner Fellowship. And it is now my distinct honor to ask Honoree and to ask Sarah Skeen on behalf of Jake Adam York to come up to the stage, please. And I would like to, on behalf of the Library of Congress and, of course, the Witter Bynner Foundation for Poetry and our 19th Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, Natasha Trethewey, present them both with awards for the 2014 Witter Bynner Fellowship. So congratulations to you both. There you go. Thanks to the Witter Bynner Foundation, we have a wonderful reception in the back, and outside of this room there are books for sale. I hope you buy books by Honoree and by Jake Adam York, and I'm sure Honoree would be happy to sign her books. And enjoy the evening, and please say hello and come again. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.